Hello, and welcome to this second podcast revisiting one of the tongue twisters from series 1 of the English Sound Building podcast. If you haven't listened to season 1 yet, I do recommend you do that before listening to this short podcast, because I'll be referring back to some of the sounds we've spoken about so far. As usual, you'll find a video bonus, as well as the very short script for today's podcast over on my Patreon page. Everything is free there, just scroll down on the main page. But if you want to support me, please do. Head to www.patreon.com/English Brick by Brick. The link's in the episode notes as well. So this week we're revisiting a tongue twister which I first introduced after the A and E episode. And this one in particular works the E sound, but it's also great for T and D. And it is Fred, fed, Ted, bread, and Ted, fed, Fred, bread. So you can hear that almost every vowel sound in the tongue twister is that E sound, with the exception of the and, which gets reduced to the schwa sound, So let's start just by reading those vowel sounds. Make sure your mouth is ready in that smile position. We'll read them once through quite slowly and then once more quickly. Listen and repeat. E, 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 e. And a bit more quickly. E, 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 e. Fantastic. Now, in some ways, it's actually easier to read those vowel sounds all together rather than having to move your mouth to find other sounds in between. But you probably still felt that the muscles in your cheeks in particular were a little tired after doing all of those after holding that smile for a bit longer. So, as I said, this tongue twister is also great for the voiced and voiceless pair D and T. And again, we're going to read those sounds individually, practicing switching between the voiced and the voiceless versions. That's the order in which they appear. I will be slightly exaggerating the voiced D here, just so that you can hear the difference more. Make sure that you've got your tongue in the right position in your mouth, particularly thinking about the blade of your tongue on the alveolar ridge, particularly if you remember from the episode that your language makes these sounds in a slightly different way. So we'll read the individual sounds first, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what happens to them in the tongue twister itself. Here they are in the order they appear in the individual words. We'll read them once quite slowly, and then once a bit more quickly. Listen and repeat. D, d, t, d, d, t, d, 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 d. And a bit more quickly. D, d, t, d, d, t, d, 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 d. Well done. But you'll notice when you hear the tongue twister that the sounds don't actually appear exactly like that. In particular, the t sound is always on the back of a word ending in d. It's always in the fed, ted combination. And I don't read that as two separate words with a gap in between. I don't lift my tongue off the alveolar ridge and then place it back on again in between the voiced fed and then the unvoiced, the voiceless ted. What I do is to switch off my voicing after that fed, but I don't lift my tongue and I just carry straight on through without the voicing, but with my tongue in the same position to make the t in ted. So we hear fed, ted, not fed, ted with the tongue lifting off. We'll talk about all of that more in the next season as well. Finally, we're going to go straight in for the full tongue twister, and we're going to sing it again this week. This one fits quite nicely to the tune of Frère Jacques if we change the words a little. So if you want to go to the script, remember that's there on my Patreon. Otherwise, just listen and repeat. Again, I am not a singer. I'm sure you'll do a much better job than I will, but we can all have fun and have a go. So we're going to read the words Fred fed Ted bread, and Ted fed Fred bread. Fred fed Ted, Fred fed Ted. Ted fed Fred bread, Ted fed Fred bread. Fred fed Ted, Ted fed Fred. Let's see how we do. Listen and repeat. I'll sing each part, first of all, allowing for you to repeat after me, so pausing in between the parts, and then we'll try it all the way through. Fred fed Ted bread, and Ted fed Fred bread. Fred fed Ted. Fred fed Ted. Ted fed Fred bread. Ted fed Fred bread. Fred fed Ted. Ted fed Fred. Well done. Let's try it all the way through. Again, I'll do it. You can either sing along with me or listen to me singing it and then repeat it all yourself afterwards. Pause if you need to. Fred fed Ted bread and Ted fed Fred bread. Fred fed Ted. Fred fed Ted. Ted fed Fred bread. Ted fed Fred bread. Fred fed Ted. Ted fed Fred. And do you think we can do it even more quickly? I'm not sure, but let's give it a go. Fred fed Ted bread and Ted fed Fred bread. Fred fed Ted. Fred fed Ted. Ted fed Fred bread. Ted fed Fred bread. Fred fed Ted. Ted fed Fred. That is so hard, but so much fun. So reading the tongue twister now as a full tongue twister should be pretty easy after all of that. Let's find out. Fred fed Ted bread and Ted fed Fred bread. Fantastic. That is the end of this week's short podcast. There's another tongue twister for you, revisited in the bonus episode this week, the video bonus episode. So please do head over to my Patreon to check that one out. Have fun sound building, and I'll see you again soon.